We do have a quorum.
Okay. All right, it's 6 o'clock. We'll start the meeting. I think a few other members will be joining in. Welcome, everyone. This is the City Council's ad hoc committee on affordable housing. And we are very fortunate today to have a special guest. It's Secretary of Housing and Economic Development for Massachusetts, Michael Keneally. So thank you very much for being here. But before we go into that, I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll.
All right, Councilor Paz.
Present.
Councilor Vidal.
Present.
Daria Gear. James Lacrosse.
Present.
Robert Waters.
Present.
Diana Young.
Present.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Councilor Vidal moves that we accept the minutes from the previous meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. I think for the secretary's benefit, why don't we go around the Hollywood Squares here and just briefly introduce ourselves. I'll just start. Tom Stanley, Waltham State Representative and City Councilor at Large. Mr. Waters.
Bob Waters from the city's housing office.
Very good. Diana.
Hi, Diana Young. I'm the former chair of the Community Preservation Committee and active in some other areas around housing.
Carlos.
My name is Carlos Vidal, and I'm one of the large city councilors here in Waltham.
First Latino city councilor in Waltham's history.
Great.
And Joe Vazad. Joe, are you still there? Joe's the assistant.
I'm still here. I was on mute.
Okay. Very good. Tom Magno, the city treasurer and clerk of this committee, is here. And Mr. Lacrosse, want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jimmy Lacrosse. I'm with the planning department.
Very good. And Daria, there you go. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Daria, and I work for Watch CDC in Waltham.
Very good. Okay. Do we have anyone else?
Councilor Paz from Ward 9.
Oh, sorry,
Second.
Councilor.
Second Latino councilor ever elected in Waltham's history.
That's right.
All right.
Welcome. All right. So I'm going to introduce the secretary, and I just want to read from his bio because we're very fortunate to have him here, and I want everyone to understand his background. As Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, Mike Keneally is responsible for advancing the Baker-Polito administration's agenda to create economic opportunity for residents, collaborative leadership in communities, an environment that supports job creation and business growth, and new housing for residents through targeted investments. In early 2015, Secretary Keneally joined the administration as Assistant Secretary for Business Growth. As Assistant Secretary, Secretary Keneally played an integral role in advancing the administration's strategy for job creation and business development across the entire Commonwealth and provided leadership in key sectors, including serving as co-chair of the board of the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center. Secretary Keneally combines a successful track record in the private sector with a strong commitment to the public good. He began his career in private equity at TA Associates, Boston-based firm. In 1997, he joined Spectrum Equity, a private equity firm founded in 1994 with offices in Boston and San Francisco. During his more than 15 years at Spectrum, he helped grow the firm to become an established market leader with nearly $5 billion in assets under management and investments in over 100 high-growth internet software and information services companies. After his career in the public sector, Secretary Keneally spent 2 years as special advisor to the receiver at Lawrence Public Schools, where he worked with the state-appointed superintendent receiver on strategic and financial initiatives to support the school district's turnaround plan. Secretary Keneally and his family live in Lexington, where they have been highly involved in town government, education, and youth sports. He previously served as chairman of the Board of Trustees at St. John's Prep in Danvers, and currently serves on the board of visitors for the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center for Public Policy and the Social Sciences at Dartmouth College. Secretary Keneally received his undergraduate degree in government from Dartmouth College and an MBA from Harvard Business School. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for being here. And I just want to add that the Secretary really, in a short time on Beacon Hill, has really dug in and reached out across all partisan lines and everything else, and has made great partnerships with advocates and members of the legislature, and trying to advance housing opportunities for all in the Commonwealth. So with that said, Secretary Keneally, I'll leave it to you.
Great. Well, Representative, thank you so much for the really kind introduction, and great to be with you all today. I'm joined by one of the colleagues in my office, Rory O'Hanlon, who helped us with a slide presentation here. But as the representative alluded to, we've tried to make great strides to address what we call our housing crisis here in Massachusetts. It's involved a lot of outreach and work with the legislature, with a variety of advocates. We have some serious housing challenges. I'm always happy to have a forum like this to talk about how we see the challenges and opportunities. And so really nice to be with you. I'll go through a relatively brief presentation and look forward to any questions you have and a good discussion. So Rory, why don't we get the deck up there? Great. Let's go to the next one. So just by way of background, in 2019, we went through an exercise very similar to what we did in 2015, which is to come up with an economic development plan for the Commonwealth. By statute, every new term of a governor requires the creation of an economic development plan. And we spent a lot of time doing a lot of listening around the state. We held 9 large regional engagement sessions around the state. We had a variety of other sessions on more defined topics. We got a lot of input, and we decided that at this moment in time, there were really 4 things we had to focus on. And we call these the pillars of our plan. And this is a plan the governor signed in December of last year. And the 4 pillars are: respond to the housing crisis, build vibrant communities, support business competitiveness, and train a skilled workforce. And there'd be 5 principles that would help drive the work against those pillars: equitable opportunity, the environment, regional strategies, accessible government, and infrastructure. So this has really been the framework of our work now for the last year or so. And this, by the way, is pre-COVID-19. So the plan was created and finalized in December of last year. And I always say in our team, we were using the words housing crisis long before we knew what COVID-19 was. Our housing situation has been very challenging here in the state. And we'll go through what we see are some measures to help address that crisis. So this is the overall framework for our work as we see it in housing and economic development. Next one, please. You know, as we come up with the plan, we wanted to really highlight areas of where there may be some different areas of focus versus the first term of the Baker administration. We had a great plan for that term, but every 4 years, you know, it's different challenges, different opportunities. And we thought in terms of major differences, key differences and major initiatives, you know, housing's right at the top of that list. Housing is now a core component of the economic development plan. I'm reminded every day of how intertwined housing and economic development are as we see our challenges around the state. We need a lot more transit-oriented development and regional mobility options. We need more market rate and workforce housing in gateway cities and similar markets. There's a variety of other topics here about the plan around our investments in communities, our support for businesses, our efforts to stake out leadership positions in key clusters of the innovation economy, and of course, workforce. But as we finalized our plan, we wanted to highlight the areas of slightly different areas of emphasis versus the original plan in the first term. And housing is really at the top of that list. Let's go to the next one. Again, this theme of responding to the housing crisis, we think there's really four things we have to focus on. One is housing production. We'll go through some numbers, but over the last 30 years, we've had a dramatic drop off in just the raw numbers of housing production across the state. And so doing what we can do to enable the creation of new housing, especially multifamily units, condos, starter homes in smart locations to increase availability and to help moderate our housing costs. We see that as a really core part of our strategy. We have some strategies around local zoning. We'll talk about the governor's housing choice initiative, but really trying to get more housing in downtowns and town centers and near transit. We think those are great places to have new housing development and make sure that housing is designed in a climate friendly way. So housing production is really very much at the top of our list. Housing stability is another key part of the housing strategy, increasing stability in minority and low and moderate income populations by helping to expand home ownership, reducing that home ownership gap, ensuring that people across the income spectrum, including extremely low income families, are able to access housing and the supportive services to meet their needs. And by the way, these are areas we saw again as needs pre-COVID. And I'd say the virus has only heightened the needs around some of these areas. Housing innovation, we always want to explore new ways that we can develop and finance new housing construction by leveraging local assets, having innovative regional partnerships and other solutions. And then always thinking regionally. I mentioned that as one of the core principles of our plan. Every region is different, has unique assets and opportunities. And so really trying to think about housing as we do in all matters in economic development on a regional basis. So those are really the four main themes of our housing strategy: production, stability, innovation, and a regional approach. Next one, please. Just a quick snapshot on the state of the economy. So obviously, since we finalized our plan in December of 2019 and the governor filed an economic development bill in early March of this year, the world has changed very dramatically for all of us. But just a quick snapshot here, unemployment just under 10% now across the state. We had sub 3% unemployment from late 2019 to early 2020. We had unemployment that was sub 4%, I think really since the start of the Baker administration. So just very different circumstances today. Unemployment peaked at around 17% in June. So we've seen employment come back, but still obviously with an unemployment level far in excess of what we saw pre-pandemic. There's been terrific support from the federal government for our small businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program and other areas. There are gaps, however, in where that funding has gone. And we announced a economic recovery plan last week, which is meant to plug some of those gaps. But terrific federal support. We hope there's more. More is always welcome. And there is a need to help our smallest companies who may not have participated to the extent possible in the federal programs. Small business revenue down 32%. Number of small businesses open down 29%. Consumer spending took a big hit, but I think is now recovering. And rent payments have been relatively strong throughout the pandemic from March through September. We track this stuff really carefully. But obviously, it's our economy that underpins our housing system and vice versa. And so we're very cognizant of overall economic performance and the challenges that presents. So that's a really brief snapshot of the Massachusetts economy today. Let's go to the next one. Housing, I mentioned a core component of our plan. We heard a lot during our planning process about the need for more transit-oriented development, more market rate housing, more workforce housing, more housing of all kinds, really, and including obviously deeply affordable housing. And so we've got a couple things in our plan. The idea of increasing housing production through our housing development incentive program and funding mixed income transit-oriented development around the state. We have in 2018, the governor signed the largest housing bond bill in the state's history, a $1.8 billion housing bond bill. And the way, as folks probably know, the way a lot of affordable housing gets created is by government investment and subsidy to make it happen. We just announced last week the most recent, what we call the rental round through our Department of Housing and Community Development, by the investment of over $100 million in state funds to create affordable housing around the state. A very important part of our strategy. Stability, I think we talked about a little bit before in this context, looking at climate resilient, affordable housing. A couple of other measures we propose to promote equity and fairness for tenants by making it illegal to name minors as a defendant in an eviction case. Sometimes when families unfortunately get evicted from housing, the minors become sort of caught up in that process. It makes it very difficult for them to find housing in later years, and looking at a variety of public housing reforms. So those are some of the efforts that we've promoted through our plan and our bill. Let's go to the next one. So let's talk about housing production. The need for transit-oriented housing, even in an environment now where commuting patterns may be a little bit different and people are working from home, we think there's a terrific opportunity to build more housing near public transit. The numbers here, by the way, are the numbers in the economic development bill. So the governor filed an economic development bill in early March. Obviously, things changed right after that with the pandemic. And as we got deeper into the legislative session, as we started to really get into reopening of the economy, we took a hard look at the bill and wanted to suggest to the legislature some modifications of it. And we had that discussion with the legislature in June. And the bill has made its way now through the House and the Senate and is in a conference committee now. And so the numbers here refer to the numbers in that bill. But we had proposed $35 million for transit-oriented housing. Our Mass Housing Partnership, that's MHP, in this graph did a fascinating study. They wanted to measure the density of housing near public transit, and they looked at all of our commuter rail and T stations across the state and literally counted up the number of housing units near those stops, and it was about 6.2 units per acre, which I thought was an incredibly low level of density of housing near public transit. And they further calculated if we could just get it up to 10 homes per acre, which still seems really low, that would be another 253,000 housing units. The governor's plan is to have 135,000 units built over the next 5 years. And just by having more housing near public transit, we can go a long way to meeting, if not exceeding, that goal. We think housing near public transit is a really smart policy. One is just simply to create more units and more density. But secondly, to get cars off the road, obviously. So I think that'll be a core part of our strategy going forward. Another proposal in the bill was to expand the Housing Development Incentive Program. This is for housing in our gateway cities. Often in those in markets like that, there's still a need for public subsidy, even to create market rate housing. And that's been a very successful program in the gateway cities. So those are two items of housing production, transit-oriented housing and the HDIP program. Let's go to the next one. A bit on the governor's housing choice proposal. The governor filed this bill back in 2017. I'll describe what it is, and then filed it again in early 2019, and then filed it in the economic development bill this year. And happily, it is in the bill passed by the House and by the Senate. We think it's a very important initiative, but it's meant to address the difficulty in rezoning properties at the local level for housing. And so literally for 100 years now, it's been state law that a rezoning of any property is, one, a local decision, and two, requires, as I'm sure folks know, a 2/3 vote. What the Housing Choice Initiative does is, for a handful of what we deem housing best practices, it lowers that voting threshold from a 2/3 supermajority to a 50% plus one simple majority. And we think that will have the effect of unlocking production of all types of housing, frankly, in all regions of the state. We do think the housing crisis is driven predominantly by a lack of supply. And so if you look at the graphs down the bottom, this looks at housing production in Massachusetts back to 1960. If you think about a couple of endpoints there, these numbers aren't here, but from 1960 to 1990, the state produced 900,000 units of housing. From 1990 till today, that number is about 435,000. And so it literally in a single generation, we cut in half our level of housing production in Massachusetts at a time when our population is growing, our economy is growing. And, supply and demand being what it is, we've seen really rapid increases in housing prices. So rents are up 75% since the year 2000. Home prices have increased faster than any other state since 1980. The number of our households that are cost burdened by housing, meaning they're paying at least 30% of their income on housing, is up dramatically. Somewhat shockingly, 1 in 4 of our renters pay more than 50% of their income on rent. And so we very much believe that zonings ought to be local decisions, and they will remain so. But we think it ought to be easier to rezone properties for housing. And that's the essence of the governor's housing choice proposal. Let's go to the next one. A bit more what's covered under housing choice. Here are specifically the again, the zoning changes that would be subject to the simple majority, not the 2/3, reducing dimensional requirements for housing, reducing required parking ratios, created mixed-use zoning in town centers, multifamily and starter home zoning in town centers. Again, this theme on what we call smart locations and housing near downtowns and near public transit. Some requirements or options rather on natural resource protection zoning, open space residential development, and a few other things. But again, and accessory dwelling units, I think, is an important one as well as some special permits to create more affordability. So we think this is a very smart proposal that will really get at the heart of some of our challenges in housing production, the incredibly high barrier that a 2/3 vote means for housing production. Let's go to the next one. So other items in the economic development bill, $40 million for neighborhood stabilization. This would be capital funding for nonprofits, municipalities, and community development corporations to help revitalize neighborhoods and return blighted, vacant, or abandoned properties back to productive use as affordable housing. And I know in our most recent rental round, we had some projects like this. Clearly, some of the housing developments we fund are new construction, but a lot are older buildings, and some of which have been kind of off the market, out of operation now for some time. And this would be a dedicated pool of capital to help bring those properties back to life, back to productive use as housing. Sustainable and climate resilient affordable housing. We've had a strategy now trying to be aggressive and proactive around the climate crisis, and clearly housing provides as a source of some of the climate challenges we have. This would be a dedicated pool of money to help build more climate resilient affordable housing. Let's go to the next one. And I want to say a little bit about the, so that was a kind of quick tour of our economic development plan, and specifically a bit on the housing strategy. And it really comes down to having much more housing production around the state to reverse the cycle we've had for the last 30 years of very low housing production, to build more affordable housing, build more market rate housing, build more workforce housing, and really get at that both through some targeted zoning reform and our capital programs, both existing programs and some proposed new ones. So that's how we see the overall economic development strategy and the housing strategy within that. I thought I might spend a few minutes on our eviction diversion initiative, which the governor announced now a couple weeks ago. We've been very focused now since the start of the pandemic on housing stability and making sure people can stay in their homes. By way of background, the governor signed the eviction foreclosure moratorium back in April. It's a 4-month moratorium. The governor in July decided to extend that an extra 2 months to October. And what he really tasked us was doing was to come up with a strategy in those 2 months, to work very closely with the courts. We stood up a cross-agency team and trying to anticipate a world where the moratorium would expire, but we could be ready with programs and strategies, again, to help people stay in their home. So what was announced was a comprehensive set of resources by this cross-agency team and the courts to address that. And so it's about $100 million towards our rental assistance for families in transition. This helps folks to pay rent when they're having difficulty doing so. For context, this program is typically about $15 to $20 million a year. And so it's a 5 times to 6 times increase in that program. Some resources for legal representation and related services, including mediation for people experiencing housing instability. And then in the event that families are evicted, about $50 million for rehousing strategies. And the goal clearly is, here we are in a very difficult economic circumstance, to try to keep as many families in their home as we possibly can. We're working very closely with the Housing Consumer Education Centers, the HCECs. They represent the front door for a lot of these strategies. We're working with a variety of partners to stand up mediation services and legal representation services. We have stood up a 211 line and a dedicated website, mass.gov, COVID housing help. So folks can find these resources there. But we're going to be watching very, very carefully what happens now that the moratorium has expired on October 17th. We have a daily dialogue with the courts. We're trying to stay on top of this to the extent we can and be ready with the right strategies to address it. So that's our eviction diversion initiative. And yeah, a bit more on that here. Here's the 2-on-1 program and the website. And you may have seen on the highway, on the what do you call it, the kind of message boards above the highway mentioning the 2-on-1 strategy, but really trying to get the word out to people who are experiencing housing difficulties, what their rights are and what their options are. And then is that it? So that's what we've been up to in terms of housing, kind of both pre and post pandemic, and really trying to do what we can to have more housing options for people around the state, and also to address the challenges now posed by COVID-19.
Thank you, Secretary. I just have one two-part question, and then
Yeah.
we'll open it up. Thank you very, very much for that thorough illustration of what the state has been trying to accomplish, and for the amount of money that has been put forward for this evictions diversion initiative. It was more money than I expected to be put forward, but the big question is really everyone's asking, do we think this is enough? And also, when will people be able to have access to that money, the people that need it?
Right.
And before you answer that, I just want to also point out that all of this money, it not only helps people that are having difficulty paying their rent, but it also helps the property owners.
Yes.
Which I think is important for everyone to understand also, because they have these housing units, and most of them are small. They may own, I don't know the exact number, but 2 or 3, 4, 5, 8 multifamily housing units.
Yep.
They're not rolling in dough. It's a risky proposition, and they're trying to make it work. But this also helps them to be able to pay their bills and overall keep people housed. But if you could just kind of address that two-part question.
Sure. You bring up a very important point, Representative. We are very much concerned about we're very concerned about the tenants. We're also very concerned about the small landlords, because these are effectively small businesses for a lot of people. It's a source of income, and they in a lot of cases have mortgages to pay on those properties. So we remain very concerned about the landlords as well. The money is available today. What we've tried to do is simplify the application process. And we've been told that the Raft program has a somewhat cumbersome application process. The money goes out to these regional administrators. We're trying to make that as streamlined as we can. So the rental assistance money is available. Effectively, all the funding is, the funding from the CARES Act is available. I think what we're bringing online now are the mediation resources. That'll take a little bit of time to have that one fully stood up. But we are in a mode now where, it's the courts really have just opened. And so we're in an active dialogue with them, and we'll see what the volume of need is. It will take a little bit of time to work its way through, just given the nature of the process. The landlord's got to file a notice to quit, and there'll be some hearings. And so there'll be a natural time lag when our services may be needed. Also worth noting, there's been a backlog of cases in the courts as well. And so I think the timing is going to work out such that we'll be ready and operational with every aspect of the strategy at the time we think the need is going to kick in.
And does the administration believe that this is going to be enough money to address, the issue of evictions? And do we have any statistics? It's only been a week, but do we have any idea of how things are going since the state portion of the eviction ban expired?
Well, we don't have a great sense now, despite our daily dialogue with the courts. I think we'll have a better sense next week. And I do think the courts are going to focus on this backlog of cases first. On whether the money is enough, we sort of gave it our best shot. And as the governor says, he hopes it is. And if it's not, we'll have to come forward with more. Back on an earlier slide, I mentioned that rent payments have actually been quite strong throughout all this. So we track that pretty regularly. So we're in really uncharted territory here. But we thought, at least as a starting point, a Raft number, which is $100 million compared to a historical norm of 15 to 20, I think that's a healthy amount of support. And obviously, rental assistance is only part of the strategy, the mediation resources and the rehousing resources as well. So we gave it our best shot of the number, and we just have to really watch this stuff rigorously and see what the actual experience is.
I agree. It's a very healthy amount of money, and we'll see if we God forbid we don't need any additional resources. But
that's right.
I think we'll go first to a member of the committee who's the executive director of local CDC Watch, Daria.
Hi, Mike. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
I did see the sign this weekend, and it was very cool to see on the highway. I said, "Wow, that's cool."
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that was great. As Representative Stanley said, we're working really closely with this Raft program because we're tenant advocates.
Yeah.
And the applications are taking 2 to 3 months to process. Metro Housing Boston's page right now, it was 5 weeks. It just went to 8 weeks before before you will hear back. So if you apply today, they said, "Oh, please allow 8 weeks to hear back from us about whether, your application is complete or, needs more documents." So the backlog is something that is concerning to us. So one question is there any thought to how we can specifically, for Metro Housing Boston, which we're in their catchment area, how we can boost they seem to be having a staffing shortage, right? So some way to give them support with hiring to meet those staffing needs.
Well, we had that discussion today with my team at DHCD with Undersecretary Maddox and her team, and that they're working very actively with the Metro Housing Boston team to address just that. But we're seeing the same things you're seeing. It is concerning, but I think we have the right team focus on it right now. And I think through a combination of hopefully a more streamlined application process and some additional resources, we can get through that. But we're seeing the same thing you are, and I think we got the team trying to address it.
The other question has to do with what it's going to look like in the courts. Like, we're partnering with Boston College and some other legal aid type folks to see, okay, so when things hit the courts, what does that look like? Where can advocacy play a part? But one thing would be great if you could talk to is sort of how it will look in terms of accessing funds. So once someone does hit the first, meeting with the court,
right,
will they still be considered for Raft funds, or will then it switch to home-based funds? And how will that interplay between home-based and Raft work?
It's a great question. But no, the Raft program really is integral to that dialogue. So hopefully some combination of mediation plus Raft will keep people in their homes. And we have increased the Raft benefit, or rather the legislature did, from $4,000 up to $10,000. And what we said was that the $10,000 benefit level is achievable if the landlord will guarantee 6 more months of housing. And so I think it'll be some combination. Hopefully you can get some of this done with mediation without dollars, but I think the mediation plus Raft will be part of the recipe here.
So the home base won't kick in until someone's actually homeless.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Will someone from, say, the Woburn Housing Court, will there be someone from Metro Housing Boston there as part of the court proceedings, or how will that interaction with Raft happen,
Yeah, and I think, the tenant will have to, the tenant and landlord together can apply for Raft. I'm not sure if Metro Housing Boston will be in the court itself. Maybe Rory can help me out with that if he knows. But no, I think having the sort of striking the deal among tenant, landlord, and court for X amount of Raft for Y months of stability, I think will be kind of the overall construct.
So the mediator will play a big role in that. So they'll need to be familiar with the program.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Diana.
I've got just a couple of quick ones. First of all, can we, will you be able to send copies of your presentation to Tom, or to our city, to the clerk of this committee, Tom Magno, or to our representative, Tom Stanley, either one, I'm sure we get it, because it has a lot of material in it. But there are a couple of terms you use that I suspect are well-known in what you've been doing, but not necessarily well-known to the rest of us.
Okay.
Workforce housing, and also what's a gateway city, and is Waltham one of them?
Sure. So gateway city, Waltham's not. There's about 24 of our gateway cities. Lynn, Lawrence, Lowell, Fall River, New Bedford, Worcester, Salem, a bunch of others, and they're sort of our gateways because they typically are in a lot of ways are gateways for immigrants coming here to.
I see.
And so there's about 24 of those, and that's been a category the legislature's used for a handful of programs over the course of time. And our HDIP program is one of them. Workforce housing, we think about somewhere between affordable and market rate. And so, affordable is deed restricted affordable housing where we subsidize the creation of that housing and say for a period of time, there's got to be a certain number of units dedicated for people at different income tiers. And market rate is just whatever the market would bear. Workforce is kind of somewhere in the middle. And so that's how we think about it.
I'm just going to jump in a little bit. There's a three-point evaluation as to whether you're a gateway community, and I just had them all in my head and it just went out. But one of them is college education level for the community, I believe, and also the family income. And so on those two, I don't think Waltham qualifies, but interesting enough, just to point out on the other part, because I've kind of argued with some of my colleagues in the legislature about the other aspect of like English language learner students. Waltham has been getting, just as many each and every year newcomers as any of the gateway communities like Revere or what have you that have the highest number coming in. We just don't qualify in the other areas. We're very fortunate. We have a lot more money coming in locally to help pay for a lot of things. So that's just a little explanation.
But isn't our situation that we've got a bigger range of incomes? We've got an awful lot of people who are in that low income, very low income area, but then we've got people who are doing very, very well.
Right.
And so, if you split the community in half, you probably could qualify part of it as gateway.
Right. And the other gateway communities and their leaders are not going to want to parse with any of the money that is set aside for
Yes,
them.
I understand that. If I were them, I understand.
Yeah. All right. Did you have any other questions, Diana?
No, I think that, no, actually I did. The open space residential development, what is that? That was one of the topics on one of the charts.
Yeah. I think it's Rory, help me out with the more technical part of that one if you could, but it's about being able to rezone open spaces to create more multifamily housing is my understanding.
So if something didn't have a conservation restriction on it,
Yes.
but was open space.
That's right.
And in the city's open space plan, it could be?
I'm not sure if it's got to be in the open space plan or not.
No,
Rory?
but being in the open space plan wouldn't protect it, it sounds like. I'm on a board of a land trust, so I've kind of mixed,
Okay.
it's a mixed tension sometimes between housing and open space.
No, understood.
It's so it's a little, it's honestly not a tool that's used very often. So the idea here is to make it a little bit more appealing to tap into, and would require sort of a discussion between a developer and the community to figure out if they could tap into certain lands and protect some other open space. So I could follow up with you afterwards with a little more detail. It is a little technical in nature, but that's sort of the gist of how it can be utilized.
Okay. I think I would know. I think I know how to find you. I suspect if I call the secretary's office.
Or you can send him an email, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
It's important to point out on those what we call the best practices for housing choice. All those remain entirely at the community's discretion. And so there's nothing in the housing choice initiative that's a mandate. It simply says if a community wants to execute on one of these, the voting threshold will be a simple majority, not a supermajority. But it still remains very much a local decision to even pursue any of that.
No, I appreciate that. But I think going to that simple majority would make a big difference in areas like trying to have, what are they called? Accessory apartments, things like that.
Accessory dwelling units. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
And just on that issue, I think, a lot of people would just like to see all communities be mandated to have to do this, but the political support just isn't there for that. But fortunately, there are other communities that want to participate and create more affordable housing and housing in general, like the communities like Waltham do. I mean, I know we need more, but I know Arlington and I want to say, I think it was Salem, both had votes the last few years that where the legislative body, passed, had enough support, a majority, but didn't have the supermajority, so they weren't able to, create more affordable housing in their downtown area.
That's exactly right, Representative. Salem's a great example. There've been, I don't know, probably half a dozen city council votes that were 7-4. Well, seven's not a supermajority. You need 8. So trying to get around that dynamic where there's a solid majority consensus for housing, but not a supermajority consensus.
Okay.
All right.
I have a couple questions, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Paz, yes.
First off, thank you, Secretary, for being here. I have 2 questions. I promise I don't mean to play hardball here, but I just would really appreciate in the dire moment that we're in, we have maybe 50% of Waltham that are tenants, folks who pay rent. So my first question is just more about, there was a number there that you cited, 1 in 4 renters, half of their income goes into paying rent.
Yes.
Is there any indication from your administration that there's going to be, in addition to these rent relief funds, any rent stabilization efforts? It seems that the cost of rent's going up while the wages aren't keeping up with that.
Well, we think the best way we can stabilize rent is by producing more housing. That's really what we're trying to get after. To just supply and demand be what it is. We've been on the wrong end of a supply demand curve the last 30 years, and we can produce more housing. I think that would help moderate prices over time. We certainly will continue to invest heavily to create more affordable housing directly. We'll continue our rent stabilization programs, but at the end of the day, supply and demand being what it is, we simply, as the governor says, have to get back into the housing production business in a big way. So that is long-term how we solve this problem.
Okay, I appreciate that. My second question is just, as you know, there are folks who were hoping that the Housing Stabilization Act would be a more comprehensive solution to the current housing crisis that, of course, has been exacerbated by COVID. What would you say to folks who think, I'm just going to quote the executive director of Vida Urbana, like City Life. What the governor proposed does nothing to stop 100,000 plus households across the state from facing displacement and potential homelessness. It is quite frankly a drop in the bucket. What would you say to folks who, are in hopes of getting that rent relief, but simply do not have, the ability to pay for legal representation if they immediately face an eviction?
Well, we've got money in the budget now to augment those mediation and legal representation services. So we know that's a problem, and we know that folks will need help getting through that process. That's why that's really a core part of the strategy. If you look at the overall strategy, it's more money for rental assistance, more money for representation, and more money, God forbid, if folks do get evicted and get them rehoused. But no, we do recognize that need, and that is a very a core element of the overall strategy.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks again, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I want to thank Mr. O'Hanlon and Secretary Keneally for taking the time to address this committee, and also for all the hard work that your administration, Baker administration, is putting into addressing the housing crisis, and making sure that folks aren't ending up on the streets because of this healthcare crisis and economic crisis as well. So thank you so much for coming here tonight. It's been very helpful. We look forward to getting that additional information as well.
Yes, well, thank you, and great to be with you. And I was remiss in not mentioning that I know Waltham has stood up its own emergency assistance program. So wonderful to see. And I know Watch CDC has been active trying to get information out to folks as well. So it's just, it's really essential to have strong local partners at this time. So we very much appreciate your efforts as well.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Great to be with you all. Have a good night.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks.
All right. Are there any other further matters on the agenda?
There is not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Without further ado, then I guess we'll
To adjourn?
Councilor Paz moves to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed,
Aye.
the ayes have it. All right, folks, we'll talk soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Night, everybody.